So if we look at the first body paragraph, we start with a clear topic sentence. One effect of interracial or intercultural adoption is a lost sense of identity or difficulty forming individuality. So we've used the correct topic based on the order established in the introduction, and we've clearly identified for the reader that this is the topic that is going to be discussed in this paragraph. Now, I do want you to notice a grammatical issue. She writes, if the adopted child does not know who her biological parents are, or she does not know anything about her parents, etc. Okay, notice adopted child is singular, one child. It would not be correct to have written if the adopted child does not know their biological parents. We cannot use they just because we're trying to avoid gender bias. Okay, it's not an acceptable use. You must either write out his or her, and you must write out the word or, you cannot use a slash, or it is acceptable to choose a singular pronoun, in this case her. Then in the next paragraph, you could choose his or he as your singular pronoun. Now, if you're not comfortable with that idea of changing up your pronoun, changing up the gender of your pronoun, then it's important that you make your antecedent plural. We could have written if adopted children do not know who their biological parents are, and that would have been acceptable. But just make sure that you're being consistent. If you have singular, child, student, teacher, scientist, whatever it might be, you need to use a singular pronoun in reference to that. Now, the second body paragraph is still about the topic of identity. Sometimes you are going to have so much to say about a given cause or a given effect that you really cannot cram it all into one paragraph, that there is enough of a significant shift or change in what you need to say that it belongs in a separate paragraph. That's totally okay. Just be sure that, as this author did, you are connecting the two paragraphs and you're making it clear for the reader that we are still discussing the same effect or the same cause. Okay? And I want you to note between the two paragraphs, the author used 3 different sources to discuss this effect of the identity problem. So as I keep harping on, the more sources you can have building together to discuss something, the more credible your discussion will appear. Now, we move into the next paragraph with a clear transition sentence. Along with limited abilities to develop a positive identity, interracial and intercultural adoption affects the child's language development. So we're acknowledging what we've just talked about, and we are introducing our new focus, our new effect to be explored. Now, looking at some other elements from this sample paper, again as a style point, just to let you know that if you are copying something, and note this is in quotation marks, it's copied word for word, if you do need to change a word for clarity, if you need to, as in this case, whatever was written there didn't make it clear that we were referring to the adopted child, so the author of this essay felt the need to make that correction. You can do that if you put your change in squared brackets. That lets the reader know that this is modified or changed material. And in terms of documentation, you'll see that we introduce the quotation by saying, according to Wilkinson, and because we have the author's last name there, after the quotation, all we need is the date. I'll still be able to go to the reference page, find Wilkinson, and know what source this quotation came from. Now, in the next paragraph, we are moving into new effects and connecting it with the first 2 effects. All the effects of interracial and intercultural adoption are linked. While identity formation and slowed language development are major effects, secondary effects like a sense of abandonment, grief, or loss intertwine with the major effects. So establishing the hierarchy of those major or primary effects, and then what would be qualifying as a secondary effect. And it never hurts to see more examples of a correctly formatted references page. So notice that she has references centered at the top here, that these are in alphabetical order, G, K, P, S. This isn't her complete list. There are a few more that just wouldn't fit on this page. That the date is always the second item. If we do not know the date, we use ND to mark that spot. That the titles of, or the names of journals or magazines or websites are in italics. That the titles of the articles are appearing with only the first letter capitalized, unless it would happen to be a proper noun or a proper adjective, such as Korean is here. And then finally, this last example, the student actually had a document number that was available. I believe it might have been through an EBSCO or another online database. If the document number is available to you, that is something that you could include as your reference. All right. One last sample, and I just want to quickly look at the introduction and conclusion to this one. This student was writing about art censorship, and that was sort of the focus of her entire semester. And instead of beginning with a statistic like what we've seen in the other examples, this opened with a short little anecdote, a short little story. The year is 1541 and the place is Vatican City. Artist Michelangelo is just about to reveal what will become his most famous work. For years he has labored, suspended in the air on a 60-foot scaffold, completing a fresco in the Sistine Chapel. All right, so the references is something we're familiar with, but it does make you curious as to where she's going to go with this. How does Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel have anything to do with censorship and with this new topic that's being introduced? And then we transition into our thesis. Okay, in fact, a controversy which began with this one fresco was the first spark which would ignite a firestorm of art censorship known as the Fig Leaf Campaign, the effects of which are still being felt today. And this paper was one of those causal chain papers where we began with the Sistine Chapel as a cause, and then there was an effect from that which became the cause to the next effect, and all of it sort of showed the string of events that led to the Fig Leaf Campaign, and then the effects of the Fig Leaf Campaign and what that has meant to art censorship. Her conclusion: Pope Paul III's Fig Leaf Campaign was the first formal attempt at censoring art, but it was not the last. Politicians today, whether or not they are aware of the potential consequences, are still trying to pass legislation that could very easily destroy the foundations upon which this nation is built. Legalizing the censorship of visual art forms by instituting a decency test would lead to the censoring of all forms of self-expression and ultimately government control over basic human rights, including free speech. The only way to prevent this disaster is to support all arts, because, as Michelangelo would tell you, some works of art are simply too epic for a fig leaf to cover. A little bit of humor in this author's writing style that you should hopefully will pick up on, or did pick up on, and she has neatly summarized the chain of events that was discussed throughout the course of that essay. So, several different ways to approach this. I want you to keep in mind that your personality can still come through even though you're writing in third person, even though you're taking on a more of a research tone. And also just to remember that it's imperative that you are supporting your claims with references to your sources, that it's better to reference 2 or 3 different sources for each paragraph or for each claim than to simply use one and just to summarize that one. But even just using one is better than having no reference whatsoever to your research.